I stood motionless in the doorway of Marcello's, an upscale Italian restaurant I'd never visited, despite funding its renovation 3 years earlier. Through the ambient lighting and evening crowd, I could see them clearly at a corner table. My wife Rebecca and Alexander Shaw, the so-called self-made millionaire whose tech startup had received $4.2 million in funding from my investment group last year. Her hand rested on his, their fingers intertwined intimately as they leaned toward each other, completely oblivious to my presence or anyone else's. The waiter approached with a bottle of Brunello di Montalcino, a $400 vintage I recognized from the investment portfolio's expense reports Alexander had submitted last quarter, the same reports I had personally reviewed and approved from behind the anonymity of Horizon Capital Partners, where I was the majority owner and silent partner. Rebecca laughed at something he said, that full-throated laugh I hadn't heard in our home for months. She looked radiant in a dress I'd never seen, her wedding ring noticeably absent. As Alexander raised his glass in a toast, I quietly stepped back from the entrance and nodded to the hostess who had been waiting patiently. "I've changed my mind," I said calmly. She couldn't have known that my mind wasn't changed at all. It was finally perfectly clear. In my pocket, I felt my phone vibrate with another text from Rebecca. "Working late again. Don't wait up." I glanced at it briefly before opening my banking app and initiating a carefully orchestrated sequence that would fundamentally alter 3 lives within the next 72 hours. My name is Daniel Weiss, 42 years old, founder and principal partner of Horizon Capital Partners, a private investment firm that specializes in early-stage technology ventures. On paper, I'm successful but not remarkably so. Upper management at a mid-sized financial services company, comfortable income, respectable but not flashy lifestyle. That's by design. What few people know, including my wife of 12 years, is that I control investment capital exceeding $220 million through a complex network of shell companies and private partnerships. I've structured my life this way deliberately, preferring to wield influence without attracting attention. I met Rebecca at a charity fundraiser when we were both 28. She was brilliant, ambitious, working as a marketing director for a cosmetics company with plans to eventually launch her own agency. I was already successful, but carefully maintaining a modest public profile. We connected immediately over shared interests in art, travel, and building something meaningful with our lives. Our courtship was a whirlwind, engaged after 6 months, married after a year. The early years were everything I'd hoped for in a partnership. The decision to keep my true financial status private wasn't about trust initially. It was habit, caution born from watching other wealthy acquaintances become targets or have their relationships distorted by money. I always planned to tell Rebecca eventually, once our foundation was solid. But time passed, patterns were established,
and the right moment never seemed to arrive. The longer I waited, the more difficult the conversation to initiate. Instead, I created a conversation that appeared to be the result of sensible.
Our home in Westchester was beautiful, but not extravagant. We took nice vacations, but not ostentatious ones. Rebecca continued her career, eventually starting that marketing agency she'd dreamed of, with some early-stage loans from me that were actually gifts I never expected repayment for. I told her they came from a small inheritance from my uncle, another in a series of misleading statements that seemed harmless at the time. The cracks in our marriage began about 3 years ago. Nothing dramatic, just the slow drift that happens when 2 people stop making each other a priority. Rebecca's agency was thriving, demanding more of her time and attention. My investment work required frequent travel that I couldn't fully explain. We were living parallel lives rather than shared ones, each of us pulling away in subtle ways neither acknowledged. Then Alexander Shaw appeared in both our lives, though from vastly different angles. To me, he was a promising investment opportunity, a 34-year-old entrepreneur with an innovative security software platform and impressive early market traction. His pitch to Horizon Capital was compelling enough that I authorized initial funding, a $4.2 million with potential for another $6 million in the second round. To maintain my anonymity, I conducted all business through my operating partner, James, who served as the public face of Horizon. To Rebecca, Alexander was a new client for her agency, charming, attractive, and radiating the confidence that comes from recent success. Her firm handled the marketing launch for his company's new product line. I actually encouraged her to take him on as a client, pleased with the synchronicity, but never imagining it would lead to betrayal. I first noticed something was off about 4 months ago. Rebecca's work hours became increasingly unpredictable. Our already infrequent intimacy dwindled to nothing. She installed a passcode on her phone, something we'd never done in our relationship. Small lies accumulated about her whereabouts, easily disproven but never confronted, because I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. There wasn't. The reality of her affair with Alexander came together through a confluence of professional and personal information streams. As his investor, I had access to his company's expense reports, which showed frequent dinners at upscale restaurants and hotel charges that didn't align with any business travel. As Rebecca's husband, I noticed corresponding gaps in her schedule, mysterious weekend work retreats, and a new wardrobe that never seemed to be worn at home. Still, I needed certainty before taking any action. I'm not impulsive by nature. My success has always come from careful analysis and strategic patience. So I watched and waited, gathering information methodically while maintaining our increasingly hollow daily routines. The confirmation came last Tuesday when I accessed our phone records and saw the pattern of late-night calls and texts. That evening, Rebecca mentioned a client dinner on Friday night. A check of Alexander's calendar, accessible through our investor portal, showed he had blocked the same time for a marketing review. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was enough to justify more direct investigation, which is how I found myself standing in the doorway of Marcello's on Friday night, watching my wife of 12 years romantically intertwined with a man whose existence depended entirely on my continued financial support. I didn't confront them. That would have been emotional, messy, and ultimately counterproductive. Instead, I returned to my car and drove to my office, mind remarkably clear despite the betrayal I'd witnessed. There's a strange clarity that comes with absolute certainty, even when that certainty is painful. At the office, I reviewed our investment agreement with Alexander's company, TerraSec Solutions. As I suspected, there were several provisions that would be useful in the coming days, including a morality clause regarding company leadership conduct, a requirement for transparency in all business relationships, and most importantly, a capital call option that would allow us to demand immediate repayment of certain development funds if specific milestones weren't met. I then examined Rebecca's client contract with TerraSec, which I had access to as her spouse and unofficial business advisor. The professional entanglement added another layer of complexity and leverage to the situation. By midnight, I had outlined a comprehensive strategy that would address both the personal betrayal and the professional complications. This wouldn't be about revenge. Revenge is emotional and often self-defeating. This would be about consequences, clarity, and ultimately, resolution. The first step was securing my own position. I transferred certain assets to protected accounts and updated my estate planning documents, not out of pettiness but prudence. I then contacted James, my operating partner at Horizon, requesting an urgent review of TerraSec's compliance with our investment terms, specifically regarding their development timeline and expenditure reporting. Is there something specific I should be looking for? James asked, puzzled by the late-night request. Just thoroughness, I replied. I have concerns about their cash management, and James, this stays between us for now. Next, I prepared 3 documents, a detailed accounting of our marital assets reflecting their true values rather than the modified versions Rebecca was familiar with, a record of the times, dates, and locations of her encounters with Alexander that I could document, and a proposed settlement agreement that was generous but comprehensive. The final piece was the most difficult but necessary. I recorded a video message explaining everything, my financial deception through our marriage, my discovery of her affair, and the steps I was prepared to take. I wasn't proud of the secret I'd kept, but neither was I willing to accept sole responsibility for our situation. With preparations complete, I returned home well after midnight. Rebecca was asleep, or pretending to be, when I entered our bedroom. I noticed her phone on the nightstand, the notification light blinking steadily. For a moment I considered checking it, searching for additional evidence of her betrayal. Instead, I simply prepared for bed, slipping under the covers, with the calm certainty that this would be one of our last nights under the same roof. Saturday passed with excruciating normalcy. Rebecca and I moved through our weekend routines like actors performing familiar roles. Coffee on the patio, casual discussion of an upcoming dinner with friends, household chores divided by long-established habit. If she noticed anything different in my demeanor, she didn't mention it. I found myself studying her, this woman I'd shared my life with for 12 years, wondering how well I'd ever truly known her, or allowed her to know me. On Sunday evening, James called with his findings on Terrasec. "You were right to be concerned," he said. "They've diverted nearly $800,000 of development funds to marketing and executive compensation. They're also behind on 3 key deliverables for the security protocol, which gives us grounds for a capital call under Section 7 of the agreement," I noted. "Exactly. Do you want me to initiate that process?" "Not yet. Let's schedule an emergency review meeting with Alexander for tomorrow morning. 9 a.m., make it clear attendance is mandatory." "Dan, what's really going on here?" James asked, his voice reflecting our 20 years of friendship beneath our professional partnership. "I'll explain everything tomorrow," I promised. "Just make sure the meeting happens." Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of inevitable confrontation. I woke early, dressed with particular care in my best suit, and left before Rebecca awoke. On the kitchen counter, I left a simple note. "We need to talk tonight. 7 p.m. important." I arrived at the office at 8:30, reviewing my strategy one final time. At precisely 9 a.m., Alexander Shaw was shown into our conference room, looking confident. Despite the unexpected summons, James joined us, still confused about the urgency but trusting my judgment. "Alexander," I began, "thank you for coming on such short notice." "Of course," he replied smoothly, "though I'm not sure what couldn't. Wait for our regular quarterly review next month." I placed a folder on the table between us. "We've identified some concerning discrepancies in your development expenditures and timeline adherence." His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of unease, quickly masked by practiced confidence. "There have been some strategic pivots that required resource reallocation, nothing that affects our overall deliverables, including $42,000 in restaurant and hotel expenses with no corresponding client meetings or business travel?" I asked, my voice remaining perfectly professional. Alexander straightened. "I can explain those. Some were for potential investors, others for key recruitment targets." "And Rebecca Weiss? What category does she fall into?" The color drained from his face as he realized the trap he'd walked into. James looked between us, confusion giving way to understanding. "I don't know what you're implying," Alexander attempted, but his voice had lost its smooth assurance. I laid out printed copies of their text messages, restaurant receipts, and hotel charges. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You've been having an affair with my wife while misappropriating investor funds to finance it." Alexander glanced desperately toward James, who had been his primary contact throughout the investment relationship. "This is a personal matter being twisted into something it's not. James, you know how we operate." James, to his credit, remained impassive. "I know our investment agreement very well. Section 12.4 specifically addresses ethical conduct of company leadership." "This is absurd," Alexander protested. "You can't possibly—" "We can and we will," I interrupted calmly. "Horizon Capital is initiating a capital call for the full 4.2 million investment, due within 30 days as specified in our agreement. Additionally, we're freezing the pending second-round funding of $6 million. The implications hit him visibly. Terrasec didn't have $4.2 million liquid. The company had been operating on the assumption of continued investment. Without it, they would likely collapse within months. "This will destroy everything I've built," he said, voice hollow. "You should have thought of that before you used our investment to finance your personal indiscretions," I replied. However, I'm not unreasonable. There is an alternative arrangement possible. Hope flickered in his eyes. What arrangement? You will immediately terminate all personal and professional contact with Rebecca Weiss. Her agency will be removed as your marketing partner with full severance payment. You will restructure your executive team to include oversight from a Horizon-appointed financial controller. Meet these terms, and we'll convert the capital call to a structured repayment plan that won't cripple your operation. Alexander stared at me, finally understanding the complete power imbalance he'd never recognized. You're the real money behind Horizon, aren't you? Not just an executive. I didn't answer directly. Do we have an agreement? He nodded slowly, defeated. Yes, whatever you want. Good. James will work out the details with you. I expect confirmation of the terminated relationship and professional contract by end of business today. As Alexander left, visibly shaken, James turned to me. You never told me Rebecca was involved with him. I only recently confirmed it myself, I said. I apologize for putting you in this position. What happens now? He asked. Now I have another difficult conversation ahead of me. I spent the remainder of the day finalizing preparations for the evening's confrontation. At exactly 7 p.m., I arrived, home to find Rebecca waiting in the living room, tension evident in her posture. What's going on, Daniel? She asked immediately. Alexander called today, ending our agency contract with some vague explanation about investment restructuring. He wouldn't take my calls after that. He won't be taking your calls again, I said simply, setting my briefcase on the coffee table. That was one of the conditions for saving his company. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock. What are you talking about? What conditions? How would you have any say in his company? Because I own it, or more accurately, my investment firm does. I opened the briefcase and removed the folders I'd prepared. I think it's time we were honest with each other, Rebecca. Completely honest. Over the next hour, I explained everything. My hidden wealth, my ownership of Horizon Capital, my knowledge of her affair with Alexander and the steps I'd taken that day. She moved through shock, denial, anger, and finally, a stunned silence as the full picture emerged. Why? She finally asked. Why hide all this from me for 12 years? Initially, caution, then habit. Eventually, it seemed too late to change. The narrative without destroying trust, I admitted. I'm not claiming moral high ground here. My deception was different from yours, but it was still deception. So what happens now? You've destroyed Alexander's relationship with me, threatened his company. Is this revenge? Punishment? No. It's consequence. For both of us, I said, sliding the third folder toward her. This is a proposed settlement agreement. I think you'll find it fair, generous even. The house, a substantial financial settlement, and ownership of your agency free and clear. She opened the folder, scanning the documents with widening eyes. This is millions, far more than I thought we had. Like I said, I haven't been entirely truthful about our finances. And in return, a clean break, no contested divorce, no public scandal that would damage both our reputations. We each acknowledge our failings and move forward separately. Rebecca stared at me for a long moment, tears finally breaking through her composure. 12 years and I never really knew you. Maybe that's the saddest part of all this. Maybe we never fully knew each other, I suggested quietly. Or allowed ourselves to be known. She wiped her eyes, professional composure reasserting itself even in this most personal moment. I'll need my lawyer to review these. Of course, take whatever time you need. The divorce proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Painful but not vindictive. True to my word, I ensured Rebecca received everything promised in the settlement. She relocated to Chicago 6 months later to restart her life and agency there. Alexander's company survived under the restructured arrangement, though he was eventually moved to a less prominent role by the board we installed. As for me, the experience forced a fundamental re-evaluation of how I approached relationships and transparency. The walls I'd built for protection had ultimately become a prison, preventing authentic connection. My wealth had become a secret I protected rather than a resource I shared. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I initiated significant changes at Horizon Capital. We established a foundation focusing on financial literacy and entrepreneurship in underserved communities. I stepped into a more public leadership role, acknowledging my ownership and vision for the firm. These changes weren't about reputation, management, but about authentic alignment between my external life and internal values. I began dating again recently, cautiously, but with a commitment to honesty from the beginning. On my second date with Christine, a pediatric surgeon I met through a hospital charity event, I found myself sharing details about my financial situation that I'd never disclosed to Rebecca in 12 years of marriage. That's quite a first date. Revelation, Christine commented with a raised eyebrow. Most men just mention their favorite sports team. I've learned the hard way that secrets corrode even the strongest foundations, I replied. I'd rather risk oversharing than repeat past mistakes. After 12 years of marriage, my wife cheated with a self-made millionaire who had no idea I was the silent investor who could pull his funding overnight. The irony wasn't lost on me then or now, but the real lesson wasn't about power or control. It was about the price we pay for the walls we build, even when we believe they're protecting us. Sometimes those walls don't keep others out so much as they lock us in, preventing the very connections we most deeply desire. The greatest wealth means nothing without someone to share it with honestly. That's the investment strategy I'm focusing on now.